All right, so finally we're back with my next guest, and he needs no introduction. How are you doing tonight, Thomas?
I'm doing quite well, thanks, Andrew, and I hope everybody's doing well tonight.
Well, a lot of people's probably counting sheep right now, but
Yeah,
they'll
most likely.
they'll catch yeah, they'll catch up with the video eventually. But I know you've been really busy, but I have received countless emails and messages asking where you were, and I've been telling him to stay patient because he's busy. But
It's a
tonight,
Tom Fallon-esque sabbatical.
yeah,
But
tonight's topic obviously is the club, and I kind of jotted down a little opening monologue instead of trying to wing it and remember what I wanted to say. So to start this video off tonight, I want to put it in perspective what we're going to be talking about. And like Thomas was saying, this one video probably will only scratch the surface. But why is it that when we hear terms like secret society or conspiracy, do most of us get the feeling that those terms are terms that do not contain merit? For hundreds of years, these things have surrounded our communities, most of which have been out of sight and out of mind. Most of us are not privy to the business that is conducted in these groups. We hear the terms and we smirk. Have you not seen or heard about groups like Knights of Columbus, Freemasons, or Fraternal Order of Eagles? On face value, these groups seem to do great work, and maybe they do. But we as a public do not know what happens when people gain power and associate with other people of the same social status. Power corrupts. What happens behind those closed doors that we do not see? Most of these groups only accept people with a high social status originally, and still primarily only accept white men and what they deem as great character. These groups, once assembled, levy great political influence, lobby for their agendas, and heavily weigh on policymakers. JFK once said that there's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot. He also said that the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret oaths and secret proceedings. After doing some foundation work for this video, I've learned some things about some of these groups. These groups have a long list of good deeds that they do for the community. They donate to charities, they help the sick, and they support the communities. So, in face value, they come across as real Boy Scouts. So, it begs to question, why do these groups require secrecy? Why are these meetings with special attire and rituals, special handshakes and salutes? Now, we cannot say that all these groups have hidden motives and agendas, but what we can say is all deception requires secrecy. Thomas, you mentioned to me before in discussions talking about this that you can often tell who the players are in a particular town by looking on the welcoming sign when you enter a town.
that's
And
right.
I want to pick up right here and basically let you start doing your thing.
Here we are. The Manitowoc welcome sign is quite something, and I think it's telling that the Knights of Columbus have their insignia in the center of these groups that are listed here, since I believe that of all of the groups listed here, that is not a comprehensive listing of all of Manitowoc's secret societies. There are others, of course. The Masonic Lodge is not listed there, but Manawoc is a hotbed for masonry, so far as I've seen. Fraternal Order of Eagles, which we're probably going to be talking about at length tonight, they are not listed there, but the Knights of Columbus, which are listed there, I do believe are central in importance to understanding some of the covert mechanics of Manawoc and Calumet. It's important to recognize, first of all, that officially Catholics are not permitted by their church to join the Masons. The Masons were actually the papacy, the Pope, a long time ago, actually put out a papal bull that excommunicated any Catholics who were also involved in the Masonic Lodge. Now, that rule hasn't always applied to high society. There are many instances in which there are prominent Catholics who are Masons and prominent Masons who are Catholics, and even some overlap between groups like the Knights of Columbus and the Masonic Lodge, which do share a lot of similarities. One could almost call them, kind of very much one inspired by the other, in the sense that the Knights of Columbus adopted the patterns of Masonry, the structure of Masonry, what with these various degrees and higher degrees, that the lower degrees need to kind of go through the rituals, and then they get up to the higher degrees, which in the Knights of Columbus would be the fourth degree. And the Knights of Columbus also use much of the same symbolism, such as the skull and crossbones, which appears extensively in Masonic literature and in Masonic lodges, and it actually was the symbol of the Bavarian Illuminati, as well as the Order of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. And of course, this is a symbol that has historically been associated with death, associated with piracy, which is very much an indication as to the involvement of these organizations in what I would characterize as predatory commercial interests. Big business coming in and looting entire countries and such. As we saw with Iraq and Afghanistan and all of these other adventures, with Halliburton and such. The association of piracy with these secret societies is a longstanding symbolic connection there. But to get back on track with the Manitowoc sign and how the Knights of Columbus relate to the Halbach case in particular, it is important to note that Teresa Halbach's father and grandfather were both members of the Knights of Columbus. And another member of the Knights of Columbus was Jerome Fox's father, who was also a prominent judge in the area. And Jerome Fox, of course, Jerome Fox presided over Brendan Dassey's trial, and he also was the judge in whose private residence all of those officials met on November 5th. And then that was an important meeting. It was, a closed door meeting at somebody's private residence, but they made several decisions that would affect the entire case there. The first decision was to, of course, put Kratz as the head of the investigation, symbolically as the district attorney, the special prosecutor in the case. He was selected at Jerome Fox's house. He attended that meeting. They kind of selected him there. And also important was that the first search warrant to take control of Avery's property for more than a week, that was planned or drafted at Jerome Fox's house. And then right after the meeting, they walked over to Fox's law office and had it officially signed and created. But prior to that official meeting, there was an unofficial meeting at Jerome Fox's house. So I've always viewed Jerome Fox as a key figure in all of this. It's also important to recognize that he signed all of the search warrants after that point, from November 5th to something like October. So he is a very key individual involved in all of this. And key, itself, the term key is a Masonic term. They've got all of their various word games and such. And now in terms of the Masons specifically, hey Chad, and hey Millbilly, I see Millbilly has come and gone. But they've got, in terms of the Masons specifically, there is a Calumet County Masonic Lodge, which, as with most Masonic lodges, caters to the law enforcement and political elite of Calumet. Manitowoc has its own lodges, and of course the man pictured there is J.B. Van Hollen, who was a long-serving Wisconsin Attorney General. He succeeded Peg Lautenschlager, and he was the one who Ken Kratz had identified as the one who backstabbed him, Kratz said, and had set in motion the scandal that would eventually leave Kratz as rightly, I think, as the disgraced prosecutor, and kind of resulted in his ouster. But of course, nothing happens for a good reason in politics. A lot of times these guys are all, if somebody like Kratz does get exposed, it's usually just because in the Game of Thrones, somebody decided to backstab him, and the one that Kratz believed was behind it was J.B. Van Hollen. And of course, one of J.B. Van Hollen's first orders of business once he became the Wisconsin Attorney General in 2007 was to start clearing the DNA backlog at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, which one could surmise, might have provided a cover for the destruction of physical evidence in Avery's case, as well as any number of other cases that they might have wanted to sweep under the rug. When they start, trashing a large amount of evidence that's on file at the DNA evidence at the State Crime Lab, I think that's an ominous sign. And another issue with J.B. Van Hollen, and I think one of the strangest aspects of his participation in all of this, is that he happened to be in Calumet County on November 8th, 2005, on the very evening that they had discovered the cremains earlier in the day, and it was that night that they would, quote unquote, discover the key and of course the license plates discovered that same day. A very fortuitous day for Manitowoc and Calumet. That day was the same day that J.B. Van Hollen, who at that time was U.S. Attorney for Wisconsin's Western District, he happens to be in Calumet County, not at an official law enforcement meeting, but at a Masonic meeting behind closed doors at Calumet's Lodge, supposedly discussing the early history of Masonry in Europe. But, who knows what else they were discussing behind closed doors that night. Since of course the Calumet Lodge, like every other lodge, would have been a hotbed of law enforcement and political elites. So those guys, some of whom no doubt were involved in the case, they would have all been meeting behind closed doors with J.B. Van Hollen that day. I think that is potentially a key event in the background of all of this. Now, as to the Knights of Columbus, in Catholic areas, because of the ban on Freemasonry in the church, you typically see a lot of the law enforcement and political types.
Let me stop you for 1 second, Thomas. Yeah. What's the reasoning, do you think? If you don't know, I mean, you can speculate. What's the reasoning for the church, like you was pointing out, distancing themselves from groups like the Knights of Columbus or the Freemasons? I mean, is there a particular reason for that? I mean, these are upstanding groups, right?
Right. I mean, in the eyes of the church, the Freemasons were promoting a certain type of spirituality that the church did not endorse. A kind of officially, it would be a kind of deism where they kind of acknowledge the existence of a supreme being, but they don't necessarily have any input on what that means. They don't tell you that's their official perspective on it. But many people would argue as well that the Freemasons promote a certain type of esotericism or occultism that's kind of gleaned from a long tradition that goes back to the ancient mystery schools in Egypt, and even further back than that. And certainly Masonic lodges and Masonic kind of symbolism is just replete with ancient Egyptian type mythology. You see the obelisks, the pyramids with the eye of the eye above the capstone, which speaks to the eye of Horus.
The symbolism, the symbolism is very strange in these groups, especially groups that are supposedly put together for all of these good deeds. I mean, like you mentioned, the skull and bones, the symbolism, and I don't know if you've watched it, but they have I got on YouTube and I was trying to find some information on certain groups, and one of the groups was Fraternal Order of Eagles, and they have like a demonstration of one of their ceremonies and how they conduct a ceremony. Have you seen that?
I don't believe I've seen that. No.
Well, if you haven't seen it, and anybody else listening hasn't seen it, I would implore you to find it and watch it. To me, it's if you have a group together that's supposed to be doing these certain deeds, and they donate to charities, and they supposed to help the community when people are sick and this and this and that. I don't understand the reasoning for the costumes, the symbolism, and the ceremony that they have, and the rules that they govern themselves by. To me, are absolutely ridiculous. You have to watch this video that I'm talking about. I mean, I can't imagine myself doing these rituals that they do, just to conduct normal business. They have to go through this elaborate ceremony type thing, and Mr. President, and you have the treasurer, and you have it's just, to me, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and there's a kind of a built-in elitism to it, where there's this caste system of this person's better than you, not because of any type of achievements beyond rising in prominence in this private organization. Because all of these are private organizations, they're not really accountable to anybody. They are ultimately owned by who knows what. They don't disclose anything like financial information really, and so they really are these kinds of mysterious entities that are only representative of the interests of a very concentrated, very small group of people. At the
Speaking
very highest
speaking of
levels.
their finances, yeah, they have some generalized financial statements that I believe they have to file, and I actually looked into some of them. But just while we're talking about the Fraternal Order of Eagles, I mean, they actually lobbied for, I want to say, to show you the kind of financial power and lobbying power that they had. They lobbied for the passing of a Social Security Act. I
That's
mean,
right.
that's a pretty good size, uh, lobbyist to be able to push legislation like that through, huh?
Certainly is, crafting the country, one could say, building it as they could, since many of them call themselves builders, and many of them call themselves craftsmen. As you see them crafting many of the laws, crafting the architecture, crafting the geography, and the way that streets are set up and everything is often as done according to the principles laid down by these organizations. All completely benign. Of course, it's just this is all community groups, so they get to decide which goes where. But ultimately, you see the control. That's what it amounts to, is control of daily life, of life as an individual, life as a society, control by private organizations. I think that even if you can establish that these groups are doing some things that are admirable, which I think many of them are, but I think you could argue that the types of charitable activities function as something as a cover for what goes on at the higher levels, which to me appears to be undeniably an environment that is conducive to the type of old boys networks that we confront in this case. The backroom deals and everything like that. There's no minutes, there's no accountability, there's no C-SPAN watching you
Hmm.
when you're having a meeting behind the closed doors of the lodge and everything like that, or when you're having a meeting in the San Francisco redwoods with a big owl statue looming over you, like you have at the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. Which was the club of
Alex
choice.
Jones, yeah,
Oh yeah,
actually, yeah. I mean, you think what you want of Alex Jones, he's kind of out there a lot of times, but he actually broke into the Bohemian facility, and that was another ritual with the costumes and the whole 9 yards, and setting some kind of statue on fire. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
there's photos were released from the Bohemian Grove from one of those meetings a while back, where you actually saw what looked like a man who was, it was either a man or some type of stand-in, like some type of doll or something. But if it was a doll, it was very realistic, and nobody really knows where these photos are from. But you can tell it's from the Bohemian Club. Nobody's really contested that, and there's a police officer visible in the photos. But what it appears to show is a lynching that was held at the Bohemian Grove, and it's black and white photos.
I,
It appears to be a black man. Who yeah, if you have you seen those photos? um
I've seen a lot of it while looking into this, and one thing I like to mention about the Bohemian Grove is you have a lot of, as with all of these, I'm going to get to in just a second. I want to bring up something, but with the Bohemian Grove, you have a lot of top level officials. We're talking about CEOs of corporations. There's even speculation of presidents. It's all high level people that is going to these secret clubs, and uh, they actually confronted. I want to say he was the CEO of GE, General Electric, and he got really pissed.
I think, was
Uh,
that David Gergen?
It might have been, but I know he got really pissed about it, and so I mean, I, it's good that we bring that up because people that hasn't looked into this at face value, going back to my opening monologue, if you want to call it, when you hear about these things, people just blow it off. But these things are actually taking place. And another interesting thing I want to bring up real quick before we go back to this point I wanted to make is the Bilderberg meetings. I watched a whole little segment on that. Took place overseas somewhere, and all of these. At first I thought it was fake, but it wasn't. But all of these government officials from all of these different countries, billionaires, government officials, just people from around the world would have these meetings, and no one was allowed in these meetings. I believe they were called the Bilderberg meetings, and
Yeah, they hold
the
those every.
media, yeah, the media, no one was allowed in these meetings, and they were discussing quote unquote important topics that face the world. I
Right.
mean, so they're having all these discussions, which leads me right into the point I wanted to make. You could say that these groups do this, and you could say these groups do that, and all that, they do good work or whatever. But the point I wanted to make up is if you have a group that's made up of rich, predominantly white men, then what they perceive to be good works might not be good for poor people. It might not be good for people of color. It might not be good for a whole variety of different people because what this specific group of people deems to be good doesn't mean that it's deemed to be good for other people because those people aren't included in the decision making.
That's a very
So,
good point. I mean, it's not representative of the vast majority of people that are subject to the decisions that are made in these lodges. You know, that's a no, that's a fair point.
and
And
and like we talked about before, even if you have an overall goal or a, a good agenda, once you have the old boy network, like he's just one of the good old boys. You can develop factions within these groups, and just for instance, let's I tell you what, let's go ahead and move to talking about Thomas Kassurek, just as an example.
okay,
If Thomas Kassurek and a couple of a bunch of other Manitowoc sheriff's officers, and let's say they're being deposed in this lawsuit, the Fraternal Order of Eagles in general might not put the full force of their weight behind solving this problem, but there might be a faction within that local chapter that says, "Hey, you're one of us. We're not going to let this." You see what I'm saying?
exactly.
Like it's we don't know what goes on, and we can't dismiss it just because we don't understand it or we're not privy to the information.
Right, that's exactly right. I mean, it's not every member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles or every member of the Masons. Like people will say, "Oh, well, my grandfather was a Mason," or these are very large groups, but they are groups that are akin to Russian dolls. When you open up a Russian doll and there's another doll inside, and then you open up that doll and there's another doll, a smaller doll inside that doll, and it goes on. These are interconnected rings within rings within rings, and as the levels go up higher, there's factions within factions within factions. This is a club, and it functions like a club. And in every club, whether it's your country club or everything like that, there's cliques that develop inside those groups of people. And so it is an element. Absolutely, it's an element in what of these groups, of these larger groups that function, I believe, as the nucleus of a lot of the cover up and a lot of the conspiracy, a lot of the corruption that's occurring in regions like the Manitowoc Calumet area. I mean, it provides a ideal environment for that type of thing to function, for illegal operations to be conducted. Because when you want to plan an illegal operation like the potential conspiracy to murder a young photographer and plant her remains somewhere, these are not things that you can generate internal memorandums about and sit there and go through the normal chain of a command and everything like that. This requires a lot of behind closed doors politics. These things are ordered, planned, devised in conversations between two
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yeah,
conversations.
there's not going to be a paper trail of these conversations, or it's not going to be exposed to the entire group. It's going to be trusted individuals, trusted factions that you know the information is safe with.
And when you go
So,
to the Bohemian Grove, they actually have that wood statue. They didn't talk about this in Alex Jones's film, but they have a 40 foot wood cut, you know, of
wasn't it an owl or something?
there's the owl, which there's all kinds of debate as to what the owl means.
It's
Jones, of
crazy.
course, said that it was Moloch. Yeah, that it was the demon Moloch. But of course, there's not really any indication, as far as I've seen, that Moloch was ever portrayed as an owl in history. I think that it's more likely to be, from ancient Rome, Minerva. Which symbolizes wisdom. Which, like the eye that appears on all of your dollars there, it
Hmm.
symbolizes, we know things that you don't. We
The
have
all
knowledge.
seeing eye.
Yeah, the all-seeing eye, because that's when you look at it, all of the symbols, all of the symbols, if you want to really simplify what they mean, they all mean in different ways. We're better than you. We have information that you don't have. We
Hmm.
are in a position of power. It's all reinforcing this power divide that defines everything that we're looking at here. You know.
Yeah, I know Joe Rogan. He even had some podcasts talking about this very thing, and he had some interesting information too. I think he might have been where I initially heard about the Alex Jones thing, and then from there I looked it up. But specifically, if you want to move to Manitowoc with the Fraternal Order of Eagles.
One more thing, though, I wanted to
Okay, yeah,
say.
go ahead.
There are, of course, as soon as you use Alex Jones's name, there's many people who will immediately dismiss it just because of
Exactly.
his character. I should note that Alex Jones was accompanied that day by a group of British television crew from, I think, like Channel 5 or something like that, and
Hmm.
they also got the same footage that he did. And one of them, John Ronson, later wrote a book about it, and basically confirmed that that was in fact at the Bohemian Grove. And in fact, British television at that time, when Jones released his movie, they had released a television broadcast on that same trip. So of
Yeah, by
course
no
there's
mean by no means are we endorsing everything that Alex Jones says, but it I've looked into it, and even CNN. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but uh regardless of how you feel about CNN, they actually covered this story of Alex Jones breaking in there, because I
yeah.
watched the entire video of Don Lemon covering the Bohemian Grove story after Alex Jones broke in there and got that footage.
And in fact, that guy that I know that there's a tape of Jones himself getting into some type of altercation with a member of the Bohemian Grove, ending with the man angrily telling him, none of this is any of your damn business, and kind of running away from him.
I think that
And
was the CEO of GE,
that was
General
actually
Electric.
that was actually David Gergen, who of course is
Oh,
a
okay, okay, okay.
major player at CNN. Like in other news networks, he's one of these foreign policy talking heads. He appears to tell us what to think about the issues and such. Bit very very high level character. But yeah, he had David Gergen belongs to all the right clubs as well. But yeah, if we want to bring it at home to Manawoc as well, like you said, Bohemian Grove is really just a kind of the national structure, whereas Manawoc has its own structure with all of these local organizations that in turn connect to this larger national structure. And that is a very disturbing, very strange theme that runs through all of these organizations and runs through all of these things, is these very kind of bizarre practices that you talk about, these occult, the costumes, the chanting, the kind of seeming like play acting and everything, where you had in
Yeah,
that
to me,
Bohemian Grove tape, yeah, where they were going, "Oh wow, Prince of all mortal wisdom," and like it gets kind of creepy. I mean, it's gets kind of like if you walked through the woods and you saw a bunch of guys doing that in the middle of the woods, I think I'd be going the other direction.
exactly. I think we all would, unless you're absolutely crazy.
But yeah, I mean, of course, now is a good time as any to bring up one of my favorite Manawak facts, which is the fact that the indigenous people of the area used to call it the home or place of the spirits. They also called it the land of bad spirits, and of course, the Europeans as well had their own interpretation. They called it Devil's Den. You know, so I mean,
Hmm.
that is the that
I
is
wonder why
the
that. I wonder why that is. I mean, just the mysterious. I mean, I guess it probably would originate from the tribal Indians that was in that area at the time.
very
Still,
possibly the type of or maybe over the years maybe if we look back, the further we look back, we might find that Manawak is no stranger to mysterious bizarre happenings. I mean, certainly at least since the 20s we've seen a string of bizarre disappearances and murders there, beginning with, of course, with the murder of patrolman Leo Roque, who was with the Manawak Police Department, and he had it was in the 20s, I believe. It was in the 20s that he was somebody just rang the door of the police station, police and fire station. It was a combined building, and they just rang the door early morning hours. And the Leo Roque was alone for the first time ever. You know, he had normally had a partner, but he was put on the night shift alone the very night before he was murdered. And yeah, nothing suspicious about that. You know, he
yeah. I
answers the
mean,
door.
you can't. I mean, if you wrote a book about all of these different coincidences that we talk about in these various cases, I mean, people wouldn't believe it. You know, I mean, you can't have that many coincidences in these cases. It's absolutely just, it'll boggle your mind down to try to even rationalize, what's actually happening.
You have to realize that, yeah, that the underlying these strange coincidences, underlying all of these, when you have too many things that don't make sense, you start to realize that there's a type something of an evil that seems to permeate this series of events, this place that we're looking at. You know, there's a kind of a deeper manipulation going on. Like, you know, in Leo Roque's case, that's exemplified by the fact that, number one, he was placed alone, you know, without any type of partner or other person who would witness it or anything like that. He's assigned to work the night shift alone the night before his death. And then, he goes to answer the door. He's shot in the face as soon as he answers the door. He's shot in the, I believe it was the face. It may have been multiple times in the chest as well. But he was shot pretty much execution style as soon as he just went to answer the door of the combined police and fire station. And then the fire chief who worked downstairs basically delayed the response to the whole thing. He told everybody that he thought a car backfired, and that resulted in Leo Roque not getting any kind of help or emergency response for a few minutes, and it probably contributed to his death. Now, that fire chief, it's interesting to note, was not the normal fire chief. He was put in there about a couple of weeks before the shooting, when the old fire chief, the longtime fire chief, was fired without reason. He was sacked, and they didn't have any reason for it. He actually filed a complaint with the city of Manawak, saying he had not been told why he was being fired. So they get rid of that guy. They put this new guy there. Then they assign Leo Roque the night before his death to be alone on the night shift, and then this new fire chief delays the response. You know, it very much seems like similar to the Frank Serpico shooting. Like, the stage was set. You know, once again, you know, they had planned it this way. I mean, interestingly, there was a suspect that was arrested at some point in connection with Leo Roque's death, and his name was Frank Todych. Tadych. But I don't know if he might be a relation to anybody we know, but he's like Frank Todych apparently made incriminating statements to the police that were detaining and questioning him, and he had given details of the crime that were not public knowledge. He is then released without any type of information as to how he was cleared or anything, and he kind of fades into the night. You don't know what happens to him after that. And then by the 1930s, I believe, timeline might be a little bit sketchy here, but you can all check out the patrolman Leo Roque, Roque, and the strange circumstances around his death. There's still articles in the Manitowoc Herald Times Reporter about this. It's a cold case. It remains a cold case, you know, basically a century later, since we're in 2020 right now. This happened circa 1920. Um, the entire investigative file, the entire Leo Roque murder file, disappeared at some point in the late 20s or early 30s. Just disappeared from the police station without anybody knowing where it went. And you know, basically, in the words of the Two Rivers police chief, I don't recall his name, but he made a comment on that for one of the articles in the Manitowoc Herald-Times Reporter. He said there was a cloud of suspicion over that entire investigation, referring to the murder case of Patrolman Roque. And so, that something happened there. Did this guy learn something? There was did this guy learn something possibly about organized crime as it related to law enforcement? Similar to the Laurie case that you've looked at, the
Right.
Run Bambi Run, where the entire Milwaukee Police Department was interfacing with local organized crime syndicates and such. That there was, of course, this was Leo Roque was shot to death during the Prohibition era, and of course, Manitowoc was a major hotbed of kind of moonshining and stuff, and they were talking about. Al Capone was even said to have an operation there in Manitowoc. That's a long time rumor as well. So there has been some discussion as to whether Leo Roque, who was assigned on alcohol investigations, whether he had in fact discovered that perhaps there might have been a connection between the mafia and some of Manitowoc's local law enforcement, and perhaps that was what did it, or perhaps it was something else. Who knows? There's virtually no information available outside of a few scant articles in the Manitowoc Herald-Times Reporter, but this is one case that has remained unsolved for pretty much 100 years, buried.
Well, before we run out of time, did you let's talk about the players real quick that's more notable to the case. You sent me some information, and I want you to elaborate on this particular photograph.
Yes, this is the photo of J.B. Van Hollen, present at the Calumet Lodge, number 172, closed door meeting at the Masonic Lodge in Calumet County, where they are said to have, quote unquote, sketched the likely origins of Masonry in England and Europe. Now, Van Hollen at this time was the U.S. Attorney for Wisconsin's Western District.
I put up the wrong one, Thomas, but go ahead. We'll go with the next one in a second.
All right, no, that's okay. Yeah, this I think is a very key image in any case, because as we were discussing before, the November 8th was a banner day for the state of Wisconsin. In this case, this is when they found the burned remains. This is when they found the key. This is when they found the license plates, and this coincides with J.B. Van Hollen, the top Wisconsin official, being in Calumet County supposedly for entirely unrelated reasons, and he's not at the police association. He's at the Calumet Lodge number 172, and he's having a private meeting with a group of individuals whose names are not necessarily all known. You see some people referenced here, but I have to imagine that there were no small number of police and district attorneys and types like that. Calumet's law enforcement structure were probably present at this meeting with J.B. Van Hollen, which really makes one wonder as to how much of the operation against Avery was conceived and directed from behind the lodge door.
All right, exactly. And we know that Thomas Kasurik and Bushman was Fraternal Order of Eagles.
Yes, of course we have that image where in fact Manitowoc Eagles Aries 706, and when they say Airy, that's their lodges as their Aries. They here we see Officer Mike Bushman. The Eagles have named him Outstanding Officer of the Year, which I don't think all of us would agree with their assessment of Mike Bushman. But I mean, maybe he's done some things for them. I mean, this Mike Bushman is the seemingly ubiquitous in cases of cover-up in Manitowoc County. This is, of course, the first officer on scene at Ricky Hochstetler's death. Within 3 minutes of the first 911 call, there's Mike Bushman, who coincidentally happened to meet Ricky within a week of his death, doing a domestic violence call to the Hochstetler home. Who knows, whatever that may mean.
Yeah,
But
well, I have heard that. I don't remember by who, so I'm not gonna guess and put nobody's name out there. But I heard from somebody that supposedly that wasn't true. I I want to say somebody said Miss Debbie said that she don't remember any police coming out to her house.
that would be
But
interesting, because that would mean that Bushman was lying, because in fact the actual source for that is the police report by Mike Bushman, where he says, "I, Mike Bushman," and stuff, and then he refers to the fact that he knew the victim from going there a week before. It's also mentioned in Farak's book. But if in fact Debbie is saying that there were no police visits during that time period, then that would be very
no, no,
interesting,
don't
because
don't
why would
quote me to
Bushman lie
that.
about
I'm just saying I thought I heard that because there's been a lot of discussion about the Hochstetler case recently, and then I know Foul Play had uh, talked to Miss Debbie, and I want to say they even had her on maybe a podcast or something, or she gave her statements that was read on a Foul Play podcast. And so don't hold me to it, but I'm just saying, like, the best I
it?
can remember, it seems like somebody said that that wasn't true. So I was just
I've,
gonna
I've
bring that up.
I've been out of the loop for the past few days, of course. So yeah, I was, it could be. I remember that whole discussion of Debbie had that letter that she was told not to open up, I believe, or something like that, because it contained
Yeah,
the truth, everything like that. I don't know if that lead went anywhere, or if that was developed any further. But
so I heard that that was not true either. So
okay.
it, who knows? But from what I understand, it wasn't. So I mean, what do we have here?
So this is a picture. Yeah, this is
The
an image.
pencil, huh?
Yeah, the pencil there, and he interestingly, graduate of the bride is a 1967 graduate of Pius the 11th high school. So all of these, a lot of these private Catholic schools are kind of feeders into the Knights of Columbus, which is of course the church's equivalent to the Masons. And a dinner was held at the Eagles Club, Two Rivers. So, well, let me back up a little bit. This is depicting Eugene Couché and his wife. This is their marriage. And of course, I believe it says here that Thomas Kasurik was Couché's best man. So now we know that not only were
Wow.
Couché and Kasurik very, very close, very
Hmm.
close. We also know that in addition to Bushman and Kasurik, in all likelihood, Eugene Couché was also a member of the Eagles Club, and a very prominent member, because his wedding, the dinner is afterward is held at the Eagles Club. So, you see that really the upper echelon of the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office, was going to this Eagles Club. And when you talk about Gene Couché, I think his career is really a glimpse into what we're dealing with here, that it goes much higher than the county. Gene Couché entered the Army. He went to Vietnam, and he wasn't just assigned to the infantry or anything like that. He was assigned to radio intelligence, and he was assigned to the Army Security Agency, which is really one of the forerunners to the NSA. And Gene Couché, after he retires from the Army Security Agency, he enters the Army Reserves, serves in the Army Reserves for about 10 years. He becomes an officer, and then he works for the Wisconsin Department of Justice, where he's doing undercover work as a narcotics agent. Then he goes to the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office, which I think is an interesting career path, because it's almost like he took a step down from the Wisconsin Department of Justice to the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office. Or was it that he was kind of a liaison from the Attorney General's office inside the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office to maybe even babysit some of these guys from the higher level? Maybe his departure from the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office wasn't because of a conflict between him and his best man, Kasurik, as we've heard elsewhere, but maybe there was some other reason he had to go. maybe there's a reason why a week before Avery's trial, Jean Couché disappears to Ireland, and 3 days later his obituary is printed in the newspaper.
What?
A week before Avery's trial in February 2007, Jean Couché, who, of course, to address that image that you just had up there, was, of course, Jean Couché with James Link. And yeah, that's Jean Couché with James Link in 1999. That's from the Herald Times reporter. And so that is very interesting that it connects Jean Couché to at least one of the key figures involved in the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office's operation against Avery in 2005. I mean, he is similarly connected to Bushman, very, very close to Bushman, very close to Mark Rohrer, very close to some of these other guys. So I've always suspected that Couché may have had more of a role than we really recognized in the.
But going back to what you said a while ago, I want
Oh
you
yeah,
to
I'm
say,
coming back to it.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Because I was like, I've never heard that.
Yeah, I'll send you afterward. I have his. I probably should have sent it. I have his obituary, which is a very interesting obituary. It speaks to his work in military intelligence, and then from military intelligence to the undercover work as a narcotics agent with the Department of Justice in Wisconsin. But yeah, February 2007. We're a week from Avery's trial starting up. And Couché exactly a week before he disappears to Ireland. He goes to Blarney Stone in Ireland, and that's according to the papers. And then his obituary is printed in the Manitowoc Herald Times 3 days later. Now, there's been all kinds of speculation about that as to
I guess so.
As to whether maybe this was even like did he somehow make this happen? Did he somehow want to disappear or something like that? Before
Well,
the trial.
He don't look Irish to me. So I mean, what did he have family there, or he just decided to go to Ireland for? I don't know. I mean, it's very, and that's all fact. That's in his obituary.
Oh yeah,
Or
yeah. That's in his obituary. It notes that he went to Ireland, and of course that strange sequence of events has led for many years. People have asked whether in fact he did die or whether he went into hiding or something like that. Maybe pulled out some of his old military intel contacts and went to some safe house somewhere or something. He didn't want to be in the way of the firestorm during the trial and all the news coverage and stuff like that. Because of course he really was a absolutely key figure in the 85 framing of Avery.
Yeah, he got ate up in the depositions. I can't wait until those videos, the full videos come out. They tore him up.
Yeah, and absolutely too. That. I've noticed one of my kind of real tells when you look at the guilters on Reddit is when they want to push that the 85 conviction was somehow okay, that they got the wrong guy, but it was just it was the result of mistaken identification, and they try to whitewash the whole thing and remove all of the misconduct that went along with it. That is my key, kind of like that makes me think that they're working for the public relations firm there, working for the when they try to whitewash 85. And I think that I've seen that one of the big points that they've been trying to go after is trying to establish that the sketch that Couché did not trace Avery's mugshot, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. Of course he did. Just look at the two pictures, look at them side by side, and tell me trace it. Even Judge Fred Hazelwood said that at the time he said that that looks remarkably like Avery's mugshot photo. He said that in court during the trial. And Griesbach, of course, who is no friend of Avery's, has also acknowledged in his book that the sketch was traced. So there really is no point to continuing to debate this, but that's become a major plank in the public relations strategy, is to try to discredit that the idea that Couché traced that sketch, which of course he did.
Yeah, absolutely. So, leading into this next part, what other, do we know of any other any other officers? I'm interested to know. I would be interested to know, and I know you haven't found out yet, that I don't believe, and I certainly haven't, because I've been looking on newspapers.com. I bought the subscription. I've been digging like crazy, and I couldn't find half of this crap you found. I don't even know where you found it, but I'd like to know if Andrew Coburn. I, I would. I'd bet every dollar I have that he was in the Fraternal Order of Eagles with these other guys. What do you think?
I'd be willing to bet that he's probably in one of these clubs, one or the other. He's, probably in the Eagles or or the Masons. I'm not sure, exactly what his religious background is, but of course, as we were discussing earlier, it doesn't always matter. There's a strong overlap between the Knights of Columbus, which are Catholic, and with the Masonic orders, so these types of restrictions and rules, I would say, probably only apply to quote unquote normal people, but um, I yeah, when we're talking about Andrew Colburn, similarly to Eugene Couchet, he has a background arguably in military intelligence. Colburn served in the U.S. Air Force for more than 11 years, and like Couchet, serving in the Army Security Agency. And then we also have James Lank was believed to have a similar background as well. So, I think that we often see a lot of intelligence backgrounds in law enforcement, and especially in certain departments like the LAPD and the NYPD, of course, have active associations with the CIA. In the Phoenix program by Douglas Valentine, he refers to there being an infiltration of United States law enforcement agencies by federal intelligence agencies. He refers to, in fact, thousands of police across the United States who are involved in working for the CIA without even knowing it. Often they are employed by the intelligence community without even knowing it. They're asked to go do this, go do that. They are effectively intelligence assets as police officers in Herndon, Virginia, or Los Angeles, or New York. And of course, some of this has become rather open in the last few years. With New York and everything, and LA. Their police departments are basically adjuncts to the CIA, and they justify that as being necessary to fight terrorism and such. So
Mm.
there's but really that was going on for a long time. The city police departments interfacing with the CIA, but they don't admit that, or now they've started to admit that, but historically they did not admit that, because legally the CIA is not supposed to operate on U.S. soil. But of course now that's been freed up for them because of the global war on terror and such.
The
But
Patriot Act and all of this stuff. That's
Patriot
a
Act,
whole nother. That's what I was about to say, real quick, off topic. One day we're gonna have. I got to hear your thoughts on the whole JFK. One day we'll have to do uh, a JFK series or
oh,
something, because
sure.
I'm sure you have like tons of information on that. Real
Yeah,
quick,
you're in
you
New
want
Orleans.
to yeah? Do you want to cover the Dave Bagata story? You want to put
Sure,
that
and
up there? Do you have time?
yeah, sure, and
All right, I'm gonna
it
put up
actually
that
goes
first
to.
slide then.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, no, it goes to something that Deborah Kent said in the chat. She said, "Does anyone know about the lady that was working in a pub that died? Law enforcement said it was an accident, but others say it was not true." Of course, referring to the police's story about that death. Now, I believe that she may be speaking about a woman named Mary Ann Dean, Dehne, and Mary Ann Dean was a friend of Bigatka's. In fact, she was manager of Bigatka's bar. Now we'll get into that, but I want to break into discussing Dave Bigatka's account. Now you see that he says that on July 29th, 1985, which was the date of Penny Bernstein's being assaulted by Gregory Allen in Manitowoc on the shore of Lake Michigan, that he said he was there on the beach at that time. He was actually on his jet ski. Penny Bernstein has said in the past in interviews she's referred to a man on a jet ski that was present. So that confirms, corroborates an aspect of his story. Mm. But Dave Bagatka says that first of all, he says in this passage that he observed police vehicles, and one vehicle that he recognized as an unmarked county sheriff's office vehicle. And these vehicles were present on the beach prior to Penny Bernstein's being assaulted, prior to the incident taking place. And this is interesting because, of course, as we've discussed before, as is mentioned in Making a Murderer, Gregory Allen was under extensive police surveillance at the time. But they were making 14 checks on him a day. At times, there was an extensive police surveillance operation on Gregory Allen at the time of Penny Bernstein's assault, but only hours prior to her being assaulted, the police who were assigned to tail Gregory Allen were called off. Were told to investigate other crimes. So that makes you wonder that okay, if the official tailors of Gregory Allen were not on the job, then who were these other guys that Dave Vigotka saw on the beach in unmarked sheriff's office cars? Now, this is where Bogatka describes the actual incident itself. He sees Penny Bernstein running from the dunes. She's bloody, she's distressed, and Bogatka was disgusted. As a longtime resident of Manitowoc, he was upset that something like this would happen. He's described in his videos how he liked to think of Manitowoc as being a very safe place. And when he saw this, it really upset him, and he ran to the dunes in an attempt to apprehend the assailant. And I'll read from the account here, specifically the highlighted portions, that as Dave Bogatka was running toward the dunes, that the police were already on scene and were yelling, "No, no," and for him to stop and return to the beach. Now, let's just stop here and think about this. If the police are already there, if the police are in a position to be yelling at Dave Bogatka running up those dunes, "Stop, don't go up there," why aren't they pursuing the assailant or assailants?
Exactly.
And I think it's very interesting that when Bogatka does get up there, that he says that he sees somebody who looks a lot like Gregory Allen, but that's not the only person he sees. He sees a few other men who seem to be walking in the direction of the woods. All of these people were dressed in plain clothes. He also sees a man lying prone on the dune, peeking over the top toward the scene of the beach. Dave isn't positive, but he thinks he was wearing a suit, like a business suit. Like, who are these guys? And why wasn't their testimony collected? Why weren't they interviewed? Why weren't they, viewed as persons of interest in this case? Why weren't they called to testify? Why wasn't Bogatka called to testify? He said on the radio in the past, there's audio of his radio interviews out there, that he was kept away, he believes, from the trial. And, so he saw several things, which, if Bogatka is telling the truth, then we need to kind of completely recontemplate everything that we think we know about the 85 assault, because what he describes is not, it suggests that there was some degree of orchestration here, that this was not something that just happened. There are some things that, the police being there in advance, there's several other people possibly being involved, that this is an account that has always been very interesting to me for this reason, because it suggests some degree of choreography in the 85 assault, that this was something that was deliberate. And now Bogatka says that immediately after these surreal events at the beach, that he starts getting these very strange visits at his bar, Dave's Dungeon, the existence of which I have been able to confirm. It is listed on old sites that list Manitowoc's taverns and such. Dave's Dungeon is listed there. It's listed there the years that it opened, which was closed abruptly a year after its opening, and that is listed there, on those websites. So Dave Bogatka certainly operated this bar when he said he did. That much we can independently verify. Which I think
I talked to him for a good while, probably. We messaged back and forth for a good while, and he was explaining a lot of that to me about the tavern and the meetings and stuff like that in the basement, I want to say.
in the basement of the Eagles Club, no less. He described that these meetings were taking place in the basement of the Eagles Club. But to say, he sees this very strange series of events on the shore of Lake Michigan. And shortly after that, he starts getting all of these strange visits at his bar. One of these guys who comes in is a football coach. Another one who comes in is somebody that he describes, he will not name them, but he describes them as somebody who is high level in state politics and county politics. I've heard him describe this person elsewhere in videos as being a state official. And these people urged him to join some type of a club. They would refer to it as the club. And they produced photos depicting individuals, some of whom he recognized as being prominent, distinguished citizens, teachers, and such. He saw these people in these photos engaged in compromising situations and involved in sexually explicit situations. He said that he said that these people told him repeatedly that, you can join this club or you're going to have trouble. These people don't play around. You better join this club. It bordered on harassment at a certain point, and they were certainly making threats to Bogatka and to Bogatka's business, to Bogatka's well-being, telling him that you have to join this club or else. And around this time, Bogatka hires Mary Ann Dean, Dehne, and she, of course, is a bar manager, and she's employed there. Now, this is the person I believe that Deborah Kent was referring to above. She is working there. Dave Bogatka goes on a trip away from Manitowoc. I believe he was in North Carolina. I might be wrong. Yeah, he was out of state, and he left Mary Ann Dean to hold down the fort at Dave's dungeon. And Mary Ann Dean calls him. They speak on the phone, and she says that these people keep coming in. They won't stop. They keep telling me that you have to join this club. You have to join this club. And Dave Bogatka says, well, why don't you tell the police? Call the police. And she says, well, they are the police. And yeah, by the time Bogatka comes back, his bar has been ransacked. Somebody has held a free booze party there and basically cleaned him out. Nobody knows who held the party or who attended and everything like that, but apparently there were a large number of people there that were basically just cleaning him out. Mary Ann Dean, he finds out, is dead. They officially ruled that she died of a heart attack. She was 45 years old, but Bogatka later spoke to Mary Ann Dean's boyfriend at the time, and he said that when he was actually the guy who discovered her body, and that she was covered in blood at the time that he found her, and that he called the police. They rushed over, and that when they saw the scene, they were convinced it was a homicide as well. They actually handcuffed him, and then eventually the story changed from being a homicide to ruled a heart attack. But of course, that she was covered. If she was in fact covered in blood, that would be very difficult to just dismiss as a heart attack. I wonder if it's the same type of heart attack that Teresa Halbach's father had at age 31. But when he was visiting the Kennedy Space Center there, classified NASA facility, Richard Urban
Yeah.
Halbach,
Unless
spent
she
his
had a heart attack and fell over and cracked her skull or something. I mean, the coincidences are numerous, surrounding every bit of this.
And
How old
let
are you,
me.
Thomas?
I'm doing mostly well. I'm a little bit kind of
I said, how old are you?
oh, how what? I'm sorry.
How old are you?
Oh, I am 27.
Jeez. I mean, this information you have is just ridiculous. I mean, it's never ending. But
Oh,
I was
this
just,
I mean, it really is just a very fascinating study in the way things work, I think, and that's why I'm really thankful that we had Making a Murder, that we have this attention on this case, because I think it really is a glimpse into how these things are done. How the things like Stephen Avery's case is not unique. There are many other cases like this where there's seemingly systematic corruption just at every level, at the county level, at the city level, the state level. Another one, of course, is the one that Rubber Ducky has been looking at, or the Walter Kristen Skinner in Calumet County in the city of Chilton. This 2-year-old boy in October 1967 is found dead in a foster care facility. They quickly, after a 45-minute police investigation, the district attorney's office concludes that he died from quote unquote strenuous suffocation due to strenuous child's play. And
right. I remember you telling me about that.
yeah, and this is despite the fact that there is severe bruising all over the child's body, 2-year-old child's body, including what the autopsy technician thought were bite marks, and this included the private areas and everything like that. When the family sent these photos to the Children's Hospital in Wisconsin, they were unequivocal. They were like, "This is abuse. This kid was tortured. This is sexual abuse. This is physical abuse." They said that they thought that there might even be burn marks on the boy. It's disgusting. And yeah, and the district attorney's office, the city of Chilton, all levels of the local Calumet County power structure, just elected to say that this was an accident and that the boy had somehow fallen and caused this himself. The strenuous suffocation due to child's play. That's quite the death certificate. the type
Yeah, I
of
mean,
garbage they
I've
pull through.
never heard of you playing so hard that you suffocate yourself, but
Yeah,
especially with bite marks all over you.
the father tried to argue that he heard he heard some type of fall or something like that. The foster father was never investigated. The foster mother was never investigated. Neither of them were ever treated as suspects, despite the fact that when they were, it wasn't until 2003 that the police reinvestigated it because the family didn't even have these photos until then. The family finally got the photos from Mike Claser's office, which of course Mike Claser, the same guy that signed the Teresa Halbach death certificate before her remains were even identified weeks before, I believe. The Mike Claser who declared on Nancy Grace that she knew the fact that the two were guilty and everything like that. Even though she had never actually gone to the scene, he had never actually gone to the scene. Mike Claser was supposed to be the one that went to the scene and everything like that in place of the coroner, and yet he never actually went. And yet he felt confident appearing on Nancy Grace's show and declaring that he knew for a fact that the two were guilty, despite the fact that he had no firsthand knowledge of it whatsoever. And the death certificate of Teresa Halbach is, quite bizarre. I mean, there were even news stories about it a while back, about how strange a death certificate it was, saying it said that they didn't have a body, but then it said that there was an autopsy completed. I mean, and then they said that they had, and the fact that the death certificate was even signed and drafted when it wasn't for weeks later until they had actually even confirmed the remains that they had were hers. I mean, the point of the matter is that the death certificate really was a kind of a sham death certificate that was just rammed through that so that they could get the trial on the road, and get everything on the road and settle all doubts and everything like that. It just speaks to how there was a preconceived conclusion at every avenue in this investigation, that there was no actual probing
Well,
going on.
well,
Let's get
go ahead.
yes. Yeah, sorry. I'm just yeah, it's been a long crazy day and I'm just going all over the place.
No,
Okay,
man,
we're rambling now.
that's why people love listening to you because you're like a encyclopedia, a audio version of an encyclopedia. But um, I believe you stated possibly, not guarantee, but possibly you might want it to maybe do another one tomorrow night, maybe part two to this one, or we could do a different topic or whatever. But I'm gonna give you the last word, and you can use as much time as you want before we end this one. Keep everybody up from sleeping.
All right. Yeah, no, the Walter Skinner case, like the Ricky Hochstetler case, these are two examples of cases, much like Avery's case. All three of these cases are glimpses into the mechanics of an old boys network, because in all three of these cases, you see individuals who are involved in the other cases. There's a real coordination, a real kind of club, to use Dave Bagotka's word, as the club and everything like that. You see in the Ricky Hochstetler's death, you see Bushman, you see Kasurik, you see Lenk, you see Colburn, you see Jost is now handling the case, the Ricky Hochstetler case. Colburn retired and handed it to Jason Jost, who of course was one of the two officers who located the cremains in plain view after 3 days of searching. Now you see these individuals in Manitowoc, all of the ones that were involved in the Avery case were also involved in the Ricky case, virtually all of them, and in the Calumet case of Walter Kristen Skinner, you see virtually all of the same people involved in the Avery case. As far as the Calumet side of that case, you see them all involved in the Walter Kristen Skinner case. You see Mark Ott, who was assigned to investigate it in early 2003, and he didn't interview the surviving suspect, for more than a year. The foster father had passed away by that point. The foster mother, he didn't interview her for a year. After he closed up the investigation, Ken Kratz refused to open a criminal investigation, refused to change the death certificate to anything other than to homicide. He agreed that they could turn it to undetermined. Mike Claser, who the Skinner family later said that Mike Claser had actually falsified information about Walter Kristen Skinner's death. So Mike Glazer, of course, the Calumet County Medical Examiner, the Calumet County District Attorney Ken Kratz refused to open an investigation. Mark Ott was rewarded afterward with an appointment to Sheriff Jerry Poggle's old guard. He got to be the undersheriff under Poggle. Eventually got to succeed Poggle. And in fact, Mark Ott's father was working the Chilton PD on the day that Walter Kristen Skinner died in October 1967, and was part of that investigation. So and then you had Mark Wiegert eventually succeeded Mark Ott as Calumet sheriff, and the Skinner family says that they've received no cooperation from Wiegert whatsoever. Wiegert refuses to even meet with the Skinner family, and he denies he has any information for them. We're not part of your case, and has basically stonewalled them. And then, of course, they took things to the higher level. They took things to the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and they got Jeff Wisch. They got Jeff Wisch, W-I-S-C-H, and that was, of course, the same Wisconsin Department of Justice agent that was assigned in 2017 to investigate Zellner's allegations. This was the same agent who, along with John Dietering, was re-interviewing Bobby in 2017, which was, of course, the interview where they said, we're not looking to go after you, Bobby. It was some of this typically kind of a softball interview where they said, we just want justice for all we're interested in is justice for Teresa. There's no mention of justice for Avery or Dassey, presuming the possibility that they didn't do it. Jeff Wisch.
Yeah, they're not worried about that.
Yeah, no, and Jeff Wisch said, then I thought it was very telling that Jeff Wisch said, just tell us the truth like you did. Like, why are you even re-interviewing him if you're already confident that he's been telling you the truth? Just tell us the truth like you did. And then, of course, Jeff Wisch was also one of the agents that interviewed Barb Tadek, and she later said that he misquoted her. He put down in his report that Barb said that she believed that her brother had something to do with the murder, when Barb later spoke to the news, said that she must have been misquoted, that she said the exact opposite of that, which to me looks like more of trying to stir the pot and get the Averys fighting amongst each other, which I think they've been doing since very early on. I think I've come to believe that it's very possible that Bobby is kind of a backup patsy, possibly that they might be setting him up. And I believe Scott was some type of a facilitator at some level in all of this, but I believe that if things are to go wrong, they've set up people like Bobby and Scott, and even possibly like Ryan as well. They've set these people up to take the blame if the whole thing is ever exposed one day. These guys they'll turn around and say, well, we didn't do it, or we didn't do most of the planting either. These guys fooled us. Ryan strolled onto the property with his access and dumped a bunch of remains onto Avery's pit, or Bobby and Scott did all of that, and we just followed the trail that they left for us. That's what they're planning to say. If this all gets exposed one day, they're going to blame the lower level guys, and they're going to try to hang those guys out to dry, all these guys that they used. And the more guys that they use, they blackmail them. They blackmail them. They get control of them that way, that once they get involved in this dirtiness, that they are not their own men anymore. They are forever kind of linked to it via blackmail. But yeah. And
well, we'll definitely be coming back with some more information, and maybe even a part 2 to this video. And there's no end in sight, and no end at all with the information that we have to talk about. So there's no end in sight for Mysteries of Manitowoc. We'll keep it going as as long as we can. And have you ever gave any more thought, or I know you stay probably too busy to even do it, but have you given any more thought to your channel?
I've got to get on that. Yeah, I'm going
How can
through.
people do you know your Twitter handle right off bat?
I'm not even on Twitter anymore.
You're not on it anymore?
They suspended my old account that I used to, yell at all these Wisconsin guys at. But,
Yeah, it's probably best you stay off there. There for a while, the last couple of weeks, I was worried that maybe they rode up there and paid you a visit, but
yeah.
I'm glad they didn't. But Thomas is in a Facebook group. He's in my Facebook group actually. Is Making Two Murderers crime investigations. If you're not part of that group, you can find it on Facebook, and there's other ways you can get in touch with him. He's on Facebook under Thomas Myrtle, and that's going to be it for tonight. And Thomas, I appreciate again as always having
Yeah.
you on, and you're always more than welcome to come on anytime you want. And I
Before we
appreciate
pop, before we pop off, would you mind if I plug something?
No, go ahead.
There's a website that I, as well as several other people, have been kind of contributing to, and we're eventually going to put a page with Teresa Halbach and Stephen Avery information on it. We're going to put a page dedicated to the Ricky Hochstetler case. We're going to put a page dedicated, in fact, to Manitowoc County in general. We have not completed that yet, but we're working on a number of these cases, like the John Benet Ramsey case, the Johnny Gosh case, and really looking at the systematic kind of corruption that is evident in all of these different cases, as well as some other issues such as election fraud is a major theme of the site, and in general, these types of sex rings and child exploitation rings. That website is www.cavdef.org. And it's kind of a wiki that we're all kind of building right now. That we're, it's me and a group of other people. So if you guys want to check that out, you'll find a lot of very arcane information about these cases that is not available elsewhere. That we've been, kind of calling people up, obtaining information from the source firsthand and such. But if anybody wants to kind of check that out,
No, absolutely.
by all means.
www.cavdaf.org, and there's, like he said, tons of information on there. And like I said, y'all can, if you can't get in touch with Thomas, because I had some emails recently, people trying to get in touch with you
I
about
just realized my message requests. I realized my Facebook. I don't see a Discord Facebook. I get really confused with some of this stuff. I see that if somebody's not added to my friends list, their messages go into some like hidden bin that I can't see unless
a
I go
message
to it.
request or something like that.
Yeah, I just learned about
Yeah.
that, so I've got to get back to people and stuff. I a couple of people that were trying to get to me and stuff.
But if you have time tomorrow evening, and I do, nothing's guaranteed. But if you do, and I do, we'll hit another episode or something. And I mean, people really enjoy these videos. I know I do. I could just sit here and listen and learn. I don't even have to talk. It's kind of easy on me. You have to do all the work. But
we've got to go to that Jefferson Davis 8. So we've got to talk about that. I'm learning about that one. That's exactly the
no,
type
the
of
Jeff Davis 8, absolutely. If you haven't seen Murder in the Bayou, and if you want to talk about corruption and informants and murders, I mean, these police are literally involved in the murders. And I mean, that's actually an interesting topic. And going back to what you said about the John Benet, one day I do want to cover. I've always been fascinated with that case. Really, America has been, but there's so many things we can talk about, and that's why I can't. Each time we get done with one, about 6-7 days later, I'm ready to do another one because it's interesting, and there's no one better to have on here that knows all the information. So
I very much
that's gonna
appreciate
be
that. It's a pleasure to
right.
be on here as always.
Well, that's gonna be it for tonight. Make sure y'all reach out to Thomas if you have any more questions on Facebook. You can join the Facebook group, Making Two Murderers Crime Investigations, and he's on there. And that's gonna be it for tonight. Appreciate y'all support.